All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of our hearing in docket 2022.07.078. As we have informed the parties, we will take time each morning for public comment. We have allotted 30 minutes this morning for public comment on this matter or any matter that comes for the jurisdiction of the Montana Public Service Commission. Again, I would remind those who are interested in providing public comment that we are limiting public comment to 3 minutes each. When your name is called, you will come forward to the podium over to my left, to the right side of the room over here. Please state and spell your name for the record. Identify where you're from, and then we'll go on from there. All right, so we will go in the order for how people signed up. Our first public commenter this morning is Mark Brastrup. Mark, are you in the room? Come on forward. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Mark Brastrup. I live in Carbon County. I'm a union journeyman lineman, a subcontractor for Northwestern Energy. I work for Par West, and we're tasked with maintaining most of the transmission lines here in the state of Montana. I'm here in favor of the Northwestern Energy rate increase. I'm here that because I also run a ranch, been doing that for 15 years between Joliet and Columbus. I'm a fourth generation out there, and on the ranch, I have to plan for a lot of the breakdowns and stuff like that. I run a 73 feed truck and a 68 loader tractor, and Northwestern Energy is kind of passed with the same things what I got to deal with. I've worked on most every transmission line Northwestern Energy owns. I've been doing it for 28 years. And we've been very fortunate getting the infrastructure rebuilt. But with the new solar and wind power that's coming in, the transmission lines aren't designed for where the new generation is going. And the conductor size is not where it should be at now. A lot has changed through the years. When we first started, we could de-energize the lines, ground them, do our work, change out the structures, and go on our way with just a 4-man crew. Now it's harder and harder to get clearances, so we have to do live line maintenance. That adds a lot more equipment, a lot more costs, a lot more people. We're one of the few companies that can do that for the transmission lines. The old conductor's been about 100 years old, and it's definitely need of upgrade. And a couple of weeks ago, the ranch was out of power in Joliet there. We were out for about 6 hours there. Of course, we're calving, had over 2 feet of snow, 9 degrees, no power. I mean, waters were freezing up. Had to get a generator, get the pellet stove going in the house. Hot box doesn't work on the calves. I packed them all up to the shop. Which about 6 hours, the power came back on, and I mean, instantly my life got a lot easier, and for my neighbors, or for the community of Joliet. If we could poke the button and the shop door opens, you got lights, you can see what you're doing. The tractor you can plug in, all those things that we take for granted. So for a few extra $100 a year, I'm more in favor for the rate increase. Thanks. RASTRUP.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Brastrup. All right. Our next public commenter is Jimmy Williams. Mr. Williams, are you in the room? Please come forward and welcome.
Good morning. Jimmy Williams, JIMMY WILLIAMS. I'm located in Redding, California. My name is Jimmy Williams. I'm the Vice President for CN Utility Consulting. We specialize in utility forestry consulting services for utilities across the U.S. and Canada. Currently, we work with over 50 utilities, and our primary goal has always been to assist our partners in providing safe and reliable power through innovative and efficient solutions. For the past 6 years, our company has partnered with Northwestern Energy, working directly with their veg management department. We've been extremely impressed with the expertise, professionalism, and commitment Northwestern UVM team has displayed. Both our teams are invested and care about the communities that we serve because those communities are their homes. Their job allows them to give back by helping ensure safe and reliable power is delivered to each home and business. Northwestern Energy also contributes to the community by providing good and fulfilling jobs to residents and local contractors like ourselves, positively impacting the local economy. The Northwestern team has done an excellent job staying true to their mission statement and has been utilizing contractors and professional consulting companies such as ourselves to help ensure that their objectives are met. This is often difficult because a successful UVM program requires professionals and qualified arborists. Those are hard to come by. However, competing budgets, economic inflation, wage competition, and limited job availability are just a few of the barriers that have made finding and keeping UVM professionals very challenging. Northwestern Energy recognizes its responsibility to their ratepayers, hard-earned dollars, and they do that wisely by prioritizing mitigating and the highest risks and effectively reducing wildfire potential and increasing the safety and reliability of the energy delivered to those they serve. As many of you know, this has become increasingly difficult in the past 5 years due to high tree mortality and the extraordinary number of wildfires we've experienced in the West. I've personally been impacted by a few of the recent wildfires in California, such as the Zog, the Dixie, and the Camp Fire, two of which were caused by tree power line conflict, and the third by electrical hardware. But fortunately, Northwestern Vegetation Management Team has been wise with their current resources. They prioritize high-risk areas and investing in efficiencies, such as new software, which allows smoother workflow and better visibility. We have also seen economic inflation reaching up to 25% in many places, leading to increased need to stretch resources and budgets much further than they were originally intended. In order for Northwestern to meet their objective, they are reluctantly seeking additional funding to maintain their infrastructure and UVM program. Without it, it would be difficult for them to continue to mitigate this risk of power line related wildfires and providing safer, more reliable power to their communities. We greatly appreciate the support of this commission and listening to our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Our next public commenter is Karen Kirk. Karen, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Good morning, Commission. My name is Karen Kirk, first name Karin, last name Kirk. I am from Bozeman. I'm a geologist and I'm here just representing myself. But I've worked in earth and energy science since the beginning of my career. I love numbers, so I'd like to share some with you. Over the past 10 years, the price of natural gas for electricity generation in our region has gone up by 54%. The price of coal by 9%. And that's just the prices of the fuel, not any other part of the electricity generation process or the consequences of it. Over the same time period, the price of wind energy has fallen by 70%. Utility scale solar energy has gotten 76% cheaper. Utility scale batteries have dropped in price by 73%. Amazing numbers. You may have heard the price of batteries went up. The price of lithium has gone up. Well, before that, the price of batteries had gone down 81%, and now it's gone down 73%. So the prices of those materials aren't having a very big effect on the overall amazing trend of the improvement in these technologies. And things like lithium, you buy it once, you've invested in the infrastructure, and then you're done, as opposed to this price of the fuels, which are burned and purchased every single day. Amazing trends. Clean energy infrastructure, once it's installed, has zero fuel cost and 80 to 95% efficiency every day. These impressive numbers are what's called the learning curve, the learning of the technology. And it's the innovation, the refinement, the efficiency, and it benefits everybody, right? The people that make the energy, the people that buy the energy, everybody. I really like this concept of a learning curve. For fossil fuels, the learning curve was amazing a while ago, decades and decades ago, perhaps even 100 years ago, depending on what technology you're talking about. The learning curve has run its course. Today's natural gas electricity plants operate at less than 50% efficiency, even with all the technology we have. The standard or the current fleet efficiency of natural gas in this country right now is 56% energy loss in converting natural gas to electricity. That's not any deficiency of anyone who designed the plants. That is just very stubborn thermodynamics. I hate to say it, which means that it actually cannot be much improved. So this is where we're at, 56% energy loss. So that means for $100 in natural gas that ratepayers buy, $56 goes up in wasted heat. That's just thermodynamics. So it's a tremendous loss that is inherent in the process and cannot really be changed. So after nearly a century of refinement, more than half of what we pay, goes up in smoke, so to speak. But it's actually worse than that, because maybe it's not literally smoke, but air pollution has real costs and real consequences that are not generally factored into this. Burning fossil fuels kills 100 to 200,000 Americans each year due to air pollution. Who pays for that? Is it factored into this? Not really. Air pollution from electricity generation in the US costs our economy $124 billion per year in health effects. Who pays for that? Kind of nobody. We kind of suck it up, no pun intended. Northwestern does not pay for the consequences of their pollution. We pay for it. We pay in real dollars and an impairment to our health, our air, our water, and our land. Can you imagine the price tag of this rate case if it included the
30
damages?
seconds.
It would be impossibly expensive. And so my closing thought is that you're going to hear days of testimony of people begging you to watch out for our clean environment that's constitutional, part of Montana. And I, maybe you have hearts of steel and none of this impacts you, but I don't think that's true. I think you care about our youth, you care about Montana, and you care about Montana's learning curve. That other states have taken advantage of these technologies and they're reaping the benefits in lower prices and modern energy and in less health impacts. And I would like Montana to not fall off that learning curve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kirk. Our next public commenter is Keith Johnston. Welcome, Mr. Johnston. Please state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Keith Johnston, KeithJohnston. I'm here today in favor of Northwestern Energy rate increase. I'm the owner of Mountain West Holding Company. We're involved with the construction industry, providing traffic control, signing, guardrail, and other services. We have offices in Missoula, Butte, Bozeman, and Billings. And during 2022, we employed over 200 people providing good paying Montana construction jobs. One thing that I can tell you is inflation has increased and it has affected what it costs to pay your employees. I don't know if anybody's tried to get employees lately, but it's very hard. I mean, our employees this year with Davis-Bacon wages, they finally recognize that the construction industry, that there's been a big gap lately and they raised the wages like 37% this year, all across the board. Work week contract with Northwestern Energy is an important part of our business. And I feel fortunate to have the opportunity to be a small part developing and maintaining the electric and natural gas infrastructure in our state. My business relies on contracted work with Northwestern, as do many other businesses across the state. I know when we pay our people more, I'm sure Northwestern has to pay their people more to attract employees. And things are just costing more these days. We should be proud of the dedicated employees of Northwestern Energy. It's critically important work they do, keeping the natural gas and electric systems operating, keep us all warm and safe at night. And they also provide economic opportunities for businesses that are moving into the state of Montana. If it wasn't for Northwestern, there's a lot of companies that could move into Montana with the reliable service they provide is very important. Occasionally I read newspaper articles about Northwestern being an out-of-state corporation. Well, while their CEO and CFO might live in South Dakota, it's important to point out the bulk of their workforce here in Montana, something like 80% of their employees live in the state of Montana. I'm always amazed by the number of Northwestern employees who work in their general office in Butte. This is a company that could have invested elsewhere. They chose to spend millions of dollars investing in our community and constructing their new offices in Butte. Their employees are my neighbors. They're coaches of my kids' sports teams. Northwestern makes its mission to support Montana communities. I just want to stress that the decisions you make here affect not only the executives and shareholders of the company, but are felt by Northwestern linemen, construction engineers, the plant operators, the accountants, the customer service representatives, companies like mine that rely on partnerships with Northwestern, and the opportunity for continued economic retention, economic expansion,
30 seconds.
future business in our state. I thank you for your time and encourage you to approve the settlement that has been presented to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your time, Mr. Johnston. Julia Shada? Shada. Thank you, Ms. Shada. Welcome. Go ahead and state and spell your name for the record and identify where you're from.
Julia, Julia, Shada, Shaida. And I live in Bozeman. I live in a neighborhood of modest houses that are gradually getting bought up and rebuilt. I am a precinct representative, and in the course of the last election, I knocked on many doors where I live. Most people's greatest concern for our community was housing and the cost of living. Retired people wondered how long they could continue to stay in Bozeman or even in Montana. Young families were worried their rent would be raised and force them out. Costs have risen not just in Bozeman, as we all know, but throughout the state. Today, Montana has the 14th highest homelessness rate per capita in the United States. 1 in 7 children face hunger in Montana. You, the Public Service Commission, are the protector of the interests of the ordinary citizen. And I am wondering if Northwestern's plan is in the best interest of the people of Montana. Will it help Montanans stay in their homes? Already, consumers in Montana pay higher rates for electricity than our neighbor states, Idaho, Wyoming, and North Dakota. I am wondering what is the most economic investment going forward. The world is transitioning to renewable energy, and costs for these technologies are dropping. Northwestern's plan should do more to prepare for the new energy economy. This plan seems to lock us into some of the most expensive methods of energy production there are. It is the Public Service Commission's job to hold the vision of how we can do better. And I urge you to oppose the rate hike. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sheeta. Our next public commenter is Harold Holm. Good morning. Welcome, sir. State and spell your name for the record and identify where you're from, please.
Mr. Chairman or President and members of the commission, my name is Harold Hoem, Haroldhoem. I'm from Butte, but I live in Missoula now. I'm a retired person. And I was born in 1937, so you can do the math. I'm not one of the younger generation, but I'm not the oldest either. And I want to echo what Ms. Kirk said. We're in a real transition in the world in our energy. And I can't see where Northwestern Energy has done a very good job of planning. In fact, it seems like they're planning in the wrong direction, trying to keep Colstrip going as long as they can, trying to add a natural gas plant. As the other speakers have mentioned this morning, among expensive ways to go, because they have to pay for fuel, coal or methane. Whereas the renewables don't have that impediment. You mentioned also fires. In Missoula, we have a lot of very expert people on fires, what causes them, why they get so bad. Jack Cohen, I've worked with before. He was at the fire laboratory. You should really look at what he says about the most important thing you can do is harden your areas around your house, firewising your house. You don't forget to overlook that because it's hugely important. And I myself worked for the Forest Service for years. I was a smoke jumper for 3 years, and I know a little bit about fire, but he knows a lot about it. And you should tap into his expertise. It's been mentioned too that Northwestern they seem to be dragging their feet into the modern world compared to other utilities. And I don't understand this. And I really don't understand how we're now faced with this huge rate increase, which I oppose. I think that planning would have not put you in this situation now. What was it? Someone mentioned it was like 10 times what the last rate increase was. To get to the age thing, the generation thing, if we're now faced with this huge increase, and then later on when the methane plant comes online, if it comes online, I guess it's been stalled because it didn't meet the air quality requirements. what is that going to do then? It's like a snowball that's going on with these economic costs. And I'm not just opposed to that. Everybody I know that's in my age group and even younger are facing, again, the inflation situation. And then this is just adding to that drastically. And I just don't think that that's fair to consumers. A lot of them don't understand why some people are sort of getting a pass on this increase. And we seem to be stuck with the
30 seconds.
okay. And I just think that you can do better and go back and look at your finances for the renewables, what they cost compared to what these other forms of energy cost. And I'm once again opposed to this bill. Thank you very much for listening to us.
Thank you, Mr. Holm. Our next public commenter is Kelby Fisher. Mr. Fisher, welcome. Please come forward, state and spell your name for the record.
Morning. My name is Kelby Fisher, Kelby Fischer. I'd like to share a recent experience that I had with Northwestern. Recently, I live here in Helena, recently acquired piece of undeveloped residential real property. And in reviewing the title commitment as part of the purchase, discovered a nearly 100-year-old utility easement granted to Northwestern's predecessor, possibly two predecessors prior, but that ostensibly encumbered the entire property and had significant implications for our development plans. After bringing the issue to Northwestern's attention, I had a very positive experience working with their legal department. The end result of which was a release of the encumbrance, as it was unneeded at this point in time, which was a positive for us in that it allowed our plans to proceed forward. So I just want to thank Northwestern for their help on that, and perhaps the commission can take that under consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. All right, that ends the list of persons who signed up to testify. Are there any persons in the room that would like to testify and have not been identified? Please come forward, state and spell your name for the record. And then identify where you're from and welcome.
Thank you, commissioners. My name is Evan Ramasco Kelly, spelled EVANROMASCO-KELLY. And I'm coming from Bozeman today. I'm 27 years old, and I've been talking with my peers about this rate increase and about what it's going to do for us. And the short answer is it's going to make life harder for us. It's going to make it less affordable for us to live in Montana. And at the same time, it's going to lock us into seemingly energy decisions from the last century. I am astounded and frankly outraged that Northwestern is coming asking for this kind of rate increase for the decisions that they seem to be making, namely investing more in Colstrip as other utilities are running away from that, which may have something to do with the fact that they have a guaranteed return on investment as long as they keep that plant open, despite that it's incredibly expensive to run for us as ratepayers. Also, that they seem to be wanting to make a new natural gas plant in the floodplain of a river that just flooded historically, 300 feet away from that. That their executive team almost all makes over $1 million a year, the Montana median household income every week of the year. That is so frustrating to me to see that happen, and then to ask them to have ratepayers pay an additional upwards of $200 a year in electricity, even though we pay more than every state around us. It just doesn't make sense. I understand that there are concerns around generation and around reliability of this generation, but these concerns don't seem to follow with their rate increase. They weren't even going to look at the credits that were granted in this Inflation Reduction Act, the single biggest investment in energy that the US government's ever made. Instead, their first decision is to come to this body and ask all Montanans to pay more. It just is so frustrating. And to know that the folks who are benefiting from this are the folks who are making the most money in the state, or they don't even live in the state. BlackRock Private Equity, which owns 14% of Northwestern Energy, will be reaping the rewards of this, while Montanans will be footing the bill. Young people across the state can't afford this rent increase. I've been chatting with my friends. Many of them have come to comment, and I so thank you for hearing their stories and their comments over these last weeks. But we really need representation here to stop this kind of monopolistic practice from really affecting us and being part of this affordability crisis that we see. There is a way forward, and we are excited to have a way forward, to have a modern energy infrastructure, to have what looks like a livable and affordable future for us as young Montanans. This rate hike is not it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramasco Kelly. I appreciate your comments. Go ahead and step forward, sir. Please state and spell your name for the record, identify where you're from, and welcome.
Thank you. My name is Brian Michelotti, spelled B-R-I-A-N. Last name is M-I-C-H-E-L-O-T-T-I. I'm the executive director of the Montana High School Association. I'm here to express our appreciation and support for Northwestern Energy and their rate increase, and explain to you how they've committed to the Montana student athletes and communities from a community service standpoint for many, many years. The MHSA is a nonprofit association regulated by 182 member schools across the state of Montana. The purpose of the MHSA is to provide leadership, development, supervision, and promotion of high school competition during the many sports and fine arts activities in which our member high schools participate. We have over 45,000 students, 500 administrators, 400 coaches, and 1,800 officials in our MHSA organization. The MHSA has had a 34-year partnership with Northwestern Energy. One major aspect of that MHSA and Northwestern Energy has been providing awards to all of our high school participants. All trophies, medals, and awards for MHSA's 25 sanctioned activities are provided by Northwestern Energy. These awards include athletics, music, and speech. Since 1988, at the end of every tournament, championship game, or performance, Northwestern Energy has been a part of every one of these positive experiences by providing these awards to the Montana High School Association, to the Montana High School student athletes, and also to their communities as well. Often, a Northwestern Energy employee is involved in those trophy presentations at the end. Also, Northwestern Energy has another great program with the MHSA. The MHSA Northwestern Energy Academic Excellence Award is provided to one Class AA, Class A, Class B, and Class C school every year. And it rewards the highest cumulative grade point average of students participating at the varsity level in those sports, speech, and drama, and music. These programs in our partnership have come with major commitment and financial support over the years, and they've been in place since 1988. On behalf of the 182 MHSA high schools, we want to thank Northwestern Energy for their support of all Montana high school students for over 3 decades. Thank you for your opportunity to provide comment today and support for MHSA's longest partner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Michelotti. Are there other public commenters in the room? Other public commenters in the room? Seeing none, we will now move to public comment online. Are there any public commenters online? Raise your hand. Use the raise your hand function if you'd like to publicly comment online. All right, seeing no public commenters online, thank you to everyone who took time this morning to come and provide public comment to the commission. I would just remind everybody that we will again set aside 30 minutes tomorrow for public comment time. Please get with our PSC staff in order to get on the list, so we know who you are and the order we can have you speak. Thank you, Tina. Okay. Time is now 9:31 a.m. Let's move back into the evidentiary portion of our hearing. I believe we left off yesterday where Northwestern Energy had called Ms. Cynthia Fang, and we were discussing extensively Northwest Energy's marked exhibits 48 and 49. There was colloquy about having Northwestern Energy provided a more comprehensive and detailed version of these documents. Northwestern Energy averred, as I recall last night, that it would email updates to the parties. And so let's start there. Ms. Heim, do you want to provide the commission with an update?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Northwestern has provided updated documents, including a document, I believe this morning, that included the extra column requested by the non-settling parties.
Provided by email?
Yes.
And then I believe that I know we received by email the documents. Does everybody have a hard copy of those as well?
We can bring those at lunch.
Okay. All right. Before we proceed any further, did all the parties receive a copy of the email documents? Does anybody not have that document? Okay, we will start there.
Actually, I think given that the most recent document we sent was this morning, it might be better to transition to the other settling party witnesses, and then we'll come back to Ms. Fang after everybody's had a few minutes to look at those documents.
Okay, does anybody object to that process? Okay, one objection. Thor?
So if one of the, oh, I can't see you. One of the issues we have is that and I appreciate I discussed this with some of the parties. The LCG witnesses had requested a date certain. And so the hope would be, if it's not inconvenient for the other parties, to have the LCG witnesses go early so that they can hopefully make a flight this afternoon out of Helena. If that's not inconvenient, that's why one of the reasons why we had supported and requested a chance to go before Ms. Fang and the other discussion regarding the bill impacts.
And I know Walmart had indicated yesterday that it had witnesses that had time constraints. Can you speak to that, sir?
We're available today, so
Okay.
anytime today, I'm guessing.
All right, Mr. Nell, I'm going to overrule your objection. As we have discussed, we need to be accommodating in order to get through this hearing. So thank you. All right, Thor, I guess, do you want to put on your witness at this point?
We're going to shuffle seats so that you can.
Okay. It's right here, sir. Morning. Were you sworn in yesterday? Okay. All right, well, that's a good point. So anybody that anticipates that they will testify in this matter, including those online, as I indicated yesterday, the Public Service Commission does a bit of an unusual process for swearing in witnesses. We utilize an en masse sort of process. So all those that anticipate testifying in this matter that were not sworn in yesterday, please raise your right hand. And I'll swear you in all at once here. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth? All right, thank you. Thor, your witness.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. Higgins.
Good morning, Mr. Nelson.
Would you please state and spell your name for the record?
My name is Kevin C. Higgins, Kevin, middle initial C, Higgins.
Mr. Higgins, by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm a principal in the consulting firm Energy Strategies.
And on whose behalf are you testifying today?
I'm here on behalf of the Montana Large Customer Group.
Mr. Higgins, did you cause to be pre-filed in this proceeding direct and cross-intervenor testimony?
Yes, I did.
Mr. President, we provided previously for the court reporter electronically in the commission what has been marked as Exhibit LCG 2, which is Mr. Higgins's direct testimony and exhibits, and Exhibit LCG 4, Mr. Higgins's cross-intervenor testimony and exhibits. And at this time, I would move the admission of those two exhibits.
All right, let's try them one at a time, perhaps.
Oh, of course.
Is there any,
I'll move the admission of LCG 2.
all right, is there any objection to the admission of LCG 2? Seeing no objection, LCG 2 is admitted into the record.
Mr. President, I move the admission of Exhibit LCG 4.
Is there any objection to LCG 4? Seeing no objection, that is entered into the record. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Higgins, in addition to the pre-filed testimony that you submitted, is it true that you were also involved in the negotiation of the stipulation that has been entered into evidence in this case as Exhibit Joint 1?
Yes,
Relative to the stipulation, do you believe that the stipulation taken as a whole is in the public interest?
yes, I do.
Do you believe that the stipulation will result in rates that are reasonable in light of the company's revenue requirements?
Yes, I do.
And do you believe that the stipulation will result in rates that are sufficient to give the company a reasonable opportunity to earn the rate of return that is specified in the stipulation?
Yes.
I want to talk to you about some of the specifics in the stipulation and get your opinion as to whether or not those issues were resolved reasonably. First, would you please explain from your perspective why you believe that the stipulated electric revenue requirement is reasonable?
Well, I believe it's reasonable for several reasons. One is that it maintains the currently approved return on equity for Northwestern Energy. It also adopts the adjustments to depreciation expense that were recommended.
Mr. Higgins, I'm sorry to interfere with your testimony. Can you, yes, exactly. Can you pull that right up to your mouth?
Will do.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
I was saying that I believe the revenue requirement, the electric revenue requirement is reasonable because it maintains the current approved return on equity for Northwestern Energy. It accepts the depreciation expense adjustments that were recommended by large customer group witness David Garrett. And it also includes a compromise on other remaining revenue requirement issues that were raised by parties to the case, including myself.
Turning now to the natural gas portion, can you please explain why you believe that the stipulated natural gas revenue requirement is reasonable?
For much the same reasons, it maintains the currently approved return on equity for Northwestern's gas utility. It also accepts the depreciation expense adjustments that were recommended by Mr. Garrett. And it also includes a compromise on other remaining revenue requirement issues that were contested by parties to the case.
Mr. Higgins, although the stipulation does not resolve with specificity all of the revenue requirement issues that were raised in this case, in your experience, is that uncommon in stipulations like this before public utility commissions?
No, it's not uncommon. When parties are trying to negotiate a revenue requirement resolution and trying to reach a compromise, they come into those negotiations with strongly held views about the proper way to treat the revenue requirement, and yet are realistic about the fact that while they may maintain their views strongly, they still may not prevail in a litigated case. And so as a consequence, it's not unusual for parties to agree on a number regarding an amount, a revenue requirement compromise without conceding their views as to the appropriate way to treat specific items in the revenue requirement.
Moving on from the revenue requirement issues, Mr. Higgins, do you believe that the proposed path forward that's described in the stipulation as to how issues involving the Yellowstone County Generating Station will be addressed in future proceedings is reasonable?
I do believe it's reasonable for several reasons. First, there would be no cost impact to customers, unless and until the facility is put into service. Secondly, there would be no cost impact on customers without the commission determining that the facility is prudent. And finally, with regard to any recovery of the capital costs associated with that facility, if it is ultimately determined to be prudent, those costs would not be recovered until after a subsequent general rate case, which is consistent with traditional regulation.
Mr. Higgins, is the LCG taking a position in this proceeding as to whether or not that facility is prudent?
No.
Let's move to the proposal regarding wildfire mitigation costs. Mr. Higgins, do you believe that the way the stipulation approaches those issues is reasonable?
Yes, I do. Rather than adoption of the rider that Northwestern Energy had originally proposed, instead there will be an opportunity for there to be deferred accounting of those costs that would be recovered in a subsequent rate case. And the amounts that are subject to the deferred accounting are capped in Exhibit E of the settlement agreement.
Do you believe that the stipulation's proposal or approach regarding what had been proposed as the technology rider is reasonable?
Yes, I opposed that rider in my testimony, and as part of the settlement agreement, Northwestern has withdrawn that its proposal for that rider.
And then above and beyond the issues that are part of the base rate increase, Mr. Higgins, do you support the way the stipulation resolved issues relating to the property taxes?
Yes, I had no particular objections to the property taxes. They, in essence, flow from the revenue requirement.
And similarly, do you have any issue with the stipulation's proposed resolution of the PCAM base level?
No, I did not have any objections to the company's filing with respect to the PCAM base level.
Mr. Higgins, do you support the stipulation's proposed elimination of the fixed cost recovery mechanism?
Yes, I do. I don't, as I argued in my testimony, I don't believe that revenue decoupling is necessary to provide utilities a reasonable incentive to pursue energy efficiency. And I believe it basically provides an unwarranted revenue assurance for utilities in between rate cases. So I believe that withdrawing that mechanism, well, it never actually went into effect, but eliminating it, I believe, is a positive step.
Mr. Higgins, do you support the stipulation's proposals regarding how demand side management costs are to continue to be recovered going forward?
I don't have any objections to how that's being handled.
One of the issues that is left unresolved by the stipulation is the issue regarding the deferred accounting request for natural gas production assets. Do you recall that, sir?
Yes.
Does the LCG have a position on that issue?
No, all the members of the large customer group purchased their natural gas supplies in the competitive market. They do not receive it from Northwestern Energy. And so as a result, that is not an issue that was addressed in my testimony.
And Mr. Higgins, one of the areas of the stipulation that we have not discussed in your direct testimony this morning are the way the stipulation addresses revenue allocation and rate design. And as to those issues, is there a witness for the LCG who will address those?
Yes, that will be addressed by Mr. Justin Bieber.
Thank you. Mr. President, I have no further questions of this witness, and he is available for cross-examination and questions from the commission.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nelson. All right, so parties will go the same order of cross-examination that we did yesterday. I'll just give you a reminder. And again, I would note for the record that the stipulating parties had agreed not to cross-examine each other's witnesses, correct?
Yes, that certainly is true.
Thank you. All right, so 350 Montana, HRC, Broadreach, Renewable Energy Northwest, and MEIC, that's the order. All right, Ms. Trinnell, cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, commissioners. Just a point of clarification, was LCG 5 moved into evidence or no?
I had not seen it
Not
marked
yet.
or moved
Okay.
into evidence at this point.
Okay, just wanted to clarify where we were on that. Okay. Good morning, Mr. Higgins.
Good morning, Ms. Trinnell.
I wanted to ask you if you look at the settlement agreement on, do you have it in front of you, page 4?
Have it?
That on the table there, just saying, and that would be the same for the gas. Which of these customer classes are you representing and advocating for in this proceeding?
The large customer group has customers that are members of GS1 primary, GS2 substation, GS2 transmission.
Okay. So those 3 in the middle there.
Yes.
Okay. And if we look over at the percent of increase for those 3 customer groups that you've identified, we have 0 for the GS1 primary, right?
Correct.
And 0 for GS2 transmission, correct?
Correct.
And then the 18.2 is for the GS2 substation, right?
That is correct.
Okay. And then if you just move to the column to the left there on the increase, it's about 2.6, just under 2.7 million for the GS2 transmission of the total increase. Is that right?
Could you direct me to the page that you're looking at, please?
Yeah, the same table we're still on. Table 1. I'm looking at table 1 on the electric side on page 4.
Got it.
Yep. So I was just looking at the increase it's in white
Yes,
for the GS2 substation is about 2.67 million, right?
that is correct.
Okay. And that's of the total of the 81 million there, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Higgins, would you accept subject to check that of the 2.67 million of 81.9 is 3.26%? Would you accept that math subject to check?
Oh, of the share of the increase?
Yeah.
I accept that. So
Okay.
subject to check.
Okay. Okay, so your clients who you've worked for in this proceeding are getting just a little over 3% of the total increase that's of this 81 million that's in this table 1, right?
Correct, but they're also a relatively small share of the total revenue to begin with.
Okay. And the 81 million here, that doesn't include the PCAM increase, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And I think you just testified that you don't have any objection to the increase on of the PCAM.
That's correct.
Okay. And do you agree, do you understand that amount to be about $70 million for the PCAM increase?
That's my understanding.
Okay. Mr. Higgins, did you talk to Northwestern about settling before you filed testimony in this case?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Do you know when they first reached out to you about settling this?
Well, Northwestern didn't reach out to me personally. Northwestern would have reached out to council.
Okay. I'm just looking for a kind of a timeline here. Do you have any independent memory of when that process started?
But it started, to my knowledge, after Northwestern filed its rebuttal testimony and took place over a period of a few weeks
Okay.
leading up to this, in the few weeks prior to this hearing.
Okay. And I think you testified that one of the large customer groups positions in this case was that you oppose the riders. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And for purposes of this settlement, what we're looking at is Northwestern has agreed not to use the riders as a vehicle for a rate increase in this docket, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Were you aware of the fact that other interveners had opposed the riders in this proceeding?
Yes.
Did the discussion ever come up among the parties that were talking about settlement? Maybe we should reach out to the other parties who also are concerned about the riders?
Going to object to the extent that violates Montana Rule of Evidence 408 regarding the confidentiality of settlement discussions.
That's fine, Mr. President, I can rephrase.
Yeah, please do.
I'm just trying to get to the fact that we have a few settling parties here and a lot of non-settling parties. The non-settling parties bearing over 90% of the rate increase and the settling parties bearing a very small portion of the rate increase. So really my question, Mr. Higgins, is, was at any point there any concern? And maybe I'll just ask you, did you have any concern about maybe reaching out to all of the interveners in this docket?
I'm going to object to the form of the question. Council's representation that the settling parties represent only a small percentage of the rate increase. I believe council was perhaps referring to the large customer group, but as council is familiar, the Montana Consumer Council was a settling party and they represent the entirety of the customer classes who are part of this rate increase. And so I object to the form of the question.
I object to the speaking objections, Mr. President. Mr. Nelson is not advocating for the Consumer Council. There will be plenty of questions for them.
I'm going to overrule. Can you read back what the question was? So, Mr. Higgins, you obviously understand that you can only speak to what knowledge you have about this process. You may answer the question.
Sure. I'm a witness to the case. I provide support to my counsel, and it was really not my role to question what parties were participating in the settlement agreement or not.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. We can move on. You testified in response to questions this morning that you believe that this settlement is fair and reasonable and in the public interest, and that's for your clients in this docket, correct?
No, it's the public interest transcends the large customer group.
So it's in the public interest for the large customer group and Northwestern?
It's in the public interest, period. Public interest is broader than the large customer group and Northwestern.
Okay. And the group that the GST substation, the one group here that's getting an increase, can you give me an example of who that is?
It happens to be one of the largest members of the large customer group. It is a refinery.
Which one? Do you know?
Going to object to that question. I would hope that the individual customers and what rate class they are on by name, I think is appropriately treated as confidential. If Ms. Trinnell wants to move into a confidential portion of the record, I think we can then answer that question. But otherwise, if the generic answer isn't sufficient, so I would object only insofar as the answer is soliciting confidential information in a non-confidential portion of the record.
I think I can ask my question without doing that, Mr. President.
Right, please try.
So my question, Mr. Higgins, is that refinery, do they pass the costs that they incur from this increase in this docket? Do they pass those costs on to their customers? Do you know?
I don't know the inner workings of the pricing for any particular member of the large customer group. However, it's my observation as an economist that refined products are sold in a competitive market. So essentially the market, the law of supply and demand determines the price of refined products, and any costs that a business may incur in producing those refined products are absorbed by the company that's producing them.
Okay. So let's go to the settlement at paragraph 15 on page 6. If you would let me know when you have that in front of you.
Did you say paragraph 15?
Yep. And it's on page 6 of the settlement.
I'm there.
Okay. And I believe it was your testimony that it's either your understanding or part of the settlement, and I'd like to clarify this, is that for the gas plant itself, there will be no increase on customer rates until the plant is in service. I think that's what I heard you say, and I just want to clarify. Was that your testimony?
Yes.
Okay. And so looking at paragraph 15 here, the language of this paragraph says that the stipulating parties, Northwestern, can request a one-time increase in the PCAM base cost. Do you see that right there at the top?
Yes.
Okay, and that would be effective the date it's in service. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and so if you go down a few lines, those costs that will go into effect the date it goes into service are the 8.4 million. Do you see that right there?
That's an estimate. Yes.
Right. And they also estimate in the 3 bullets the cost that would go into rates immediately upon the plant being in service. Do you see those 3 bullets?
Yes.
Okay. And if we just do some quick math here and adding those numbers, 2.7 and 2.3 is 5 plus 1.3 is 6.3 million. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. So we're looking at 6.3 million in the bullets that go into rates immediately upon the plant going into service, plus the 8.4. And would you agree with my math that that's $14.7 million?
Yes. And again, the stipulation provides that these would go into rates potentially upon a finding of prudence by the commission.
Is that your understanding of how paragraph 15 is supposed to work?
That's my understanding.
Okay. So I want to be really clear on this point. Is it your understanding, Mr. Higgins, that the $14.7 million would not go into rates prior to a prudency determination by the commission?
That's my understanding.
Okay. And were those the terms on which you entered into the settlement agreement?
That is my understanding.
Okay. Mr. President, I don't have any more questions right now for purposes of expediency, and I know you want to move the hearing along. I'll stop at this point on the settlement.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trinnell. HRC, Chuck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Trinnell's line of questioning has prompted a question in my mind here. The settlement First of all, good morning.
Good morning.
The settlement allocates over half of the proposed revenue requirement increase to the residential class. Isn't that correct? And that's shown on that table. I'm on the electric side now. That's on that table on page 4. So
That is correct.
okay. And that is going to have impacts on the residential class. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Are considerations about rate impacts and affordability concerns to the residential class factor that the commission should evaluate when making public interest determinations?
Yes, I'll mention that my colleague, Mr. Bieber, addressed his testimony to this topic, but I will say that the short answer to your question is yes. That's the principle of gradualism that gets applied. And indeed, the principle of gradualism is applied in this case, and that is that the residential increase, while it's material, is less than it would be if residential customers were priced at their cost of service.
I just wanted to make sure that you agreed with me that rate affects affordability concerns to the residential class of customers are a factor in determining whether or not particular rate structure, particular transaction is in the public interest.
Yes, and I would also add that the impacts on all customers should be taken into account, not just residential customers.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
Thank you. So just so the parties understand where we are procedurally. So this witness is both at this point testifying on the settlement and on the merits, if you will. And so, Ms. Trinnell, I don't know if you understood that at this point in time. I would like to ask additional questions. Okay, I just want to make that clear. All right. Mr. Uda.
No questions.
Thank you, Mr. Uda. All right. Ms. Hornbein or Ms. Chilcott?
No questions for Renewable Northwest.
Ms. Harbine? Mr. Scrimshaw?
Sean Helly.
Helly.
Thank you, Mr. President, no questions from me, I see.
All right, sorry, Mr. Helly. Okay, I think I got all the non-settling parties. All right, questions from the commission, Vice President Fielder? I think she waved off right there.
That's correct, Mr. President. No questions at this time.
All right. Mr. Panochi.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the ratepayers in my district are concerned about some of the large customer group, particularly one that may be experiencing record profits. The ratepayers concerned about Northwest Energy experiencing record profits, and if they are, why would they ask for a rate increase? Northwestern, I think, has done a good job of explaining they're not experiencing record profits. But some of the large customer group, my ratepayer feels are. They're experiencing record profits. Why shouldn't they have an increase in their rates? How do I explain that to the ratepayer?
Fair question, Commissioner. Again, my colleague, Mr. Bieber, is examined the cost of service issues, but I can still speak to the question generally. When one looks at the rates that the GS1 primary customers and the GS2 transmission customers are currently paying, and one examines the costs that they actually cause on the system, the rates that they are currently paying are greater than the costs that they are causing. And in fact, at current rates, if they were to be priced at cost, they would get rate reductions, significant rate reductions. And so the fact that they are not getting an increase simply means that they will continue to pay rates that are greater than their costs, but not move to a reduction that the cost of service indicates. It's also worth noting that a lot of the large customers purchase their generation service in the competitive market. They're choice customers. So in fact, when the price of power goes up in the competitive market as it has, they experience those very significant price increases as a result of that. They also purchase their transmission service to move the power to their facilities under federally regulated rates. And those get reset every year, and they've been going up. So those customers may not be seeing a rate increase in this retail case, but most of what they buy is not for power, is not in the retail case. Most of what they buy is in the competitive market and is federally regulated pricing. And when those rates go up, there's not a state case that's held to examine the impacts on those customers. And so it's really just part of the picture to look at this retail case and say, well, they're not getting an increase in this retail case. Well, they're really, a transmission customer really isn't taking a whole lot of service from Northwestern at the retail level.
Follow up, Mr. President. I'm listening to you carefully because I'm going to have to explain this to the ratepayer. But the ratepayer is going to put pressure on Northwest Energy to say, look, we're watching you to make sure you're not experiencing record profits, but we don't want you to be given a break to companies that are experiencing a record profit. So I have to listen to you carefully to explain to the ratepayer how you explained it to me. But still, we have a lot of testimony today where the regular household has a tremendous increase, and they're looking at companies that experience a record profit are not seeing that increase like they are. How do I defend Northwest Energy to say they're doing their part in making sure that those companies experiencing a record profit aren't paying their fair share? How do I defend Northwest Energy?
I believe the defense is that those customers in two of the three classes that are not getting an increase already pay rates that are greater than the cost to serve them. And they purchase most of their service from outside of Northwestern Energy. And so just like the residential customer may be facing an increase in the power cost part of their bill, these other customers, these large customers, are also facing the same type of pricing pressures because they're purchasing their power in the marketplace. They're not purchasing it from Northwestern. So they are all experiencing those upward impacts on their bills. It's just that for the large customers, that part of their bill doesn't come from Northwestern. The other point I would add is that there is a group that I discussed with Ms. Tranell, a group of large customers, at least a class of them, that is getting an 18% rate increase, just like the residential customers, because that is what the cost of service indicated was warranted. And so it's not as if all the large customers are not getting it.
All of them.
Follow up.
So the ratepayers in my district will say, we'll put all the residential customers together and we could approach to be a large customer group. You see, my residents don't have a choice. This is a monopoly. Northwest Energy is the only choice. But with the large customer group, you're saying they do have choice. They can buy power from someone else. So my ratepayer then turns around and says, we'll put all of us in a class and let us buy power in a big package. But we can be a large customer group? How do I answer that? How can my ratepayer say, wow, we don't have the choice to be a large customer and buy power somewhere else? Calumet, my refinery, they tell me pays less than half of what my residential group is. How do I explain that to them? Why can't they be a large customer group? And I know you have a good answer for that, but I have to represent the ratepayer and ask this question. What would your answer be to that?
Well, I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is this issue has been decided by state law. And that is that the members of the large customer group actually don't have a choice to be able to come back to Northwestern. They must buy their power in the competitive market. Similarly, the residential customers, as my understanding is that they do not have the ability by law to purchase in the competitive market. So my understanding as a non-attorney is that that's been decided in Montana law.
So an answer I could give them is to turn to the legislature. Thank you, Mr. President. No more questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Panochi. Commissioner Bukacek. All right. Mr. Higgins, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I do have a series of questions for you. I'll start with the rate design.
Yes.
I think the obvious answer to this question is yes, but did you review the settlement agreement's proposed rate design?
Yes. However, my colleague, Mr. Bieber, is the one who looked most carefully at that. And so if you have specific questions about the rate design, I would suggest he would be the better witness to ask.
All right, I'm happy to defer then on that. All right, let's turn to the settlement agreement. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I'd like to talk a little bit about the process. Can you turn to paragraph 15 of the settlement agreement?
Yes.
Page 6, paragraph 15. Are you there?
I am.
All right, thank you. You would agree with me that that paragraph discusses the agreement among the 5 settling parties to allow Northwestern file a one-time application to adjust the PCAM base, correct?
Yes.
And the property tax base
Yes.
and the prudency review concerning Yellowstone, correct?
Yes.
Right. So did you listen to the opening statement of your legal counsel yesterday, perchance?
I did not.
Hey. All right, let me ask you the question a different way then. Based on your review of the settlement, do you believe that this paragraph would if adopted, would in any way bind the commission with respect to any particular process or outcome?
I don't believe it would bind the commission, no.
Is it your understanding that if this paragraph is adopted, it would be an agreement among the parties not to object to a future application or filing on procedural or legal grounds?
I believe that is correct.
Okay. So with that in mind, talking about rate making principles, so it's your understanding if this portion of the settlement agreement is adopted, if a party to this stipulation, if that party argues that the future application violates rate making principles, then the parties are agreeing to authorize the commission to dismiss or deny the application, correct?
I don't know that I followed your question exactly, Mr. President. Perhaps you could ask me that question.
Sure. So I guess another way to say this would be, are the parties themselves, if we adopt the settlement, are the parties themselves agreeing to have the commission unilaterally reject an argument that an application violates rate making principles? The commission would be authorized to, at that point in time, based on this agreement, to reject the party's argument?
I understand your question.
All right, I'll withdraw the question. All right, so staying with this paragraph, you consider this paragraph, if adopted, would this be an example of single issue rate making?
Yes.
Can you elucidate on that?
Well, it would be calling out particular item in isolation. And so in that sense, it would be single issue rate making. At the same time, the PCAM mechanism is itself a single issue rate making mechanism. And so it would be including, if the commission were agreeable, it would be including the Yellowstone County generating station within the mechanism that is already an approved single issue rate making mechanism.
Thank you for that clarification. So back to paragraph 15. You're there.
I am.
You would agree with me that paragraph 15 contemplates that costs in a few FERC accounts not normally included in the PCAM would be temporarily included in the PCAM, correct? You would agree with me on that?
Yes.
All right, with that in mind, normal process or existing process, how would Northwestern Energy recover those costs?
Under a normal process, if Northwestern Energy had filed a rate case and Yellowstone was approved as part of the revenue requirement, then those costs would be recovered through in rates in a rate case. If the plant went into service prior to a rate case filing, then there would not be recovery of those costs until a rate case filing was made.
Okay, with that in mind, then taking paragraph 15 into account. So in a circumstance where we have a future case or filing, if there's a future filing or case where the commission is engaged in rebasing property tax and rebasing the PCAM, why wouldn't the commission in such an instance just factor those costs into the normal place in Northwestern's rates?
At such time that there would be a general rate case, I believe that would be the process that would be followed. My understanding is that paragraph 15 speaks to a treatment that would be temporary prior to an actual rate case being conducted.
Well, I appreciate that answer. Then that begets the question then, why does the settlement agreement contemplate including these costs in the PCAM, at least on a temporary basis? I mean, what's the value of that? Why did the parties come to that agreement?
It was a compromise, recognizing that Northwestern had asked for a rate rider that would be broader in scope than this. A rate rider that the large customer group objected to. And this proposal was a compromise effort to attempt to preclude the adoption of a broad-based rate rider, while at the same time provide Northwestern the opportunity to recover these operations and maintenance costs if the commission felt it was appropriate.
All right, thank you for that answer. We'll move to the FERC transmission revenue credit. That's all right.
Yes.
You prepared a proposed FERC transmission revenue or revenues using 2021 actual FERC revenues as opposed to the 3-year averaging method used by Northwestern. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Do you recall what your proposed FERC T&D transmission revenue amount was?
In terms of the total revenue requirement?
Yes.
Well, I had recommended an increase of $49.5 million for T&D revenue. Oh, yeah, total overall for electric.
Okay. Can I have you turn to exhibit KCH1? You have that in front of you?
Yes.
Can you turn to page 2 of that exhibit?
Yes.
Is there a different amount for the FERC T&D transmission revenue on that page?
Perhaps I misunderstood your question. The adjustment, the change on that item I recommended was a $16.3 million reduction. I thought that you were asking me what my overall recommended revenue increase was. But it may be easier to follow on table KCH1 on page 7 of my direct testimony. On that table, I had recommended that on page 7, table KCH1 on page 7 of my direct testimony, where I summarized all my adjustments, I had recommended a $16.3 million credit for transmission distribution for the FERC transmission revenue credit.
Okay, then turning back to exhibit A of the settlement then. 69.3 million is based on Northwestern's rebuttal proposal for FERC T&D, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So is it the large customer group's position that you're agreeing with using Northwestern's 69.3 million figure?
Not necessarily. There is a component of the stipulation that is an unspecified reduction. And we view the items that we had argued for in my testimony that are not specified as being compromise number within the unspecified adjustment. And that number is identified. I was looking for where that is in the, I believe it's in exhibit A to the stipulation. So on the electric side, there is an unspecified reduction of $3.4 million.
And why is it, forgive me for asking this most basic question, but why is it unspecified?
It's unspecified because parties, as I mentioned in my direct examination by Mr. Nelson, parties may feel strongly about the positions that they have regarding the proper treatment in the revenue requirement, and felt it more expedient to agree on a number than to agree on a specific change to the calculation method for determining the revenue.
So ultimately, what I'm hearing you testify to, you just settled on a number.
I wouldn't say just settled on a number. return on equity is specified, the depreciation expense is specified, and the parties agreed on a number for the other adjustments to reflect the compromise in views.
Okay, so let me give you a hypothetical. And this is not saying this is going to be the commission's position, but if the commission disapproves of the settlement agreement, then does it become the position of the large customer group then that the commission should adopt the proposed 81.9 million figure?
Could you please repeat the question? I'm not sure I understood it.
Sure. So I think you testified earlier that based on exhibit KCH1 that you proposed a for T&D transmission revenue of 81.9 million, correct?
Let me be clear on my answer there. So could you please refer to me to the page that you're asking about?
Sure. It's page 2, column C, line 12.
Are you looking at my exhibit?
Yes.
Okay.
Exhibit KCH1. It reads derivation of LCG transmission revenue adjustment.
Yes, sir. And
Go to line 12 on that document, please.
yes,
Column C.
yes.
What's that number?
This is the adjustment. Yeah, this is the amount of T&D transmission revenues that I was recommended be recognized for purposes of a revenue credit. Yes.
Okay. So that established, let me go back to the underlying question I asked you. If in the scenario, and I'm not saying this is where the commission is going to land, but if the commission disapproves the settlement agreement, do you believe, or is it your client's position that the commission should use your proposed 81.9, essentially 81.9 million figure that you've outlined in this document?
A large customer group supports the settlement in its entirety as a package. I also happen to believe that in the correctness of the testimony that I prepared.
So is that a yes?
Well, I don't mean to be evasive at all, Mr. Chairman, but my belief, as a witness is that when your client enters into a settlement agreement, it binds itself to support that settlement agreement. And I believe it would be sort of improper for me to having parties negotiated in good faith. I feel it would be improper for me to attempt to undermine that at the hearing supporting the settlement. But I did go on to mention that I do happen to believe in the testimony that I provided to the commission.
All right, Mr. Higgins, I'll accept that answer. Thank you. All right, so based on that answer, let me ask you this question then. Are you satisfied that the Northwestern proposed FERC transmission revenue 65 million and change, if you will, as indicated on the same exhibit we were referencing, KCH1, is an accurate representation of the revenues for rate making purposes?
Not necessarily. I refer to the fact that there is an unspecified adjustment in the settlement agreement. It does not account for the entire difference between my view and the company's view. But I will say that, for purposes of this case and for resolving all the issues that were resolved in this case, that the combination that was included in the settlement agreement, Exhibit A, is satisfactory from the large customer group standpoint. standpoint.
All right, then final question, and thank you for your testimony this morning. Would you agree that a 2-year average of the 2021 and 2022 FERC T&D transmission revenues could accurately reflect respective FERC T&D transmission revenues?
If, in terms of this case, assuming there were no settlement agreement, I would say that would be a way that they could be represented. I would still argue that if this case were still being litigated amongst the settling parties, that I would still argue in favor of the adjustment that I made, which was the based on the 2021 actuals.
Okay, that concludes my line of questioning. Mr. Hamilton, did you want to this witness some questions?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple of clarifying questions, if I may. Mr. Higgins, could you refer back to paragraph 15 that you were discussing earlier with President Brown?
Yes. I'm there.
Awesome. As I understood your earlier testimony, you understand this term to be binding among the 5 settling parties, correct?
Yes.
And so is it fair to say that that term would not prevent one of the non-settling parties, some other party, perhaps who's not even participating today, from objecting to this process?
Correct. My understanding is it would not prevent a non-signing party from objecting to this process.
So if the commission were to, let's say, approve the settlement agreement, but in this future process that paragraph 15 contemplates, we received an objection or a motion or some sort of request that the application not be considered, could the commission consider that objection from the non-settling party?
I would say, as a non-attorney, certainly, I don't think it was the intention of the parties to any way preclude the commission from being able to reach the kinds of determinations the commission needs to make.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. President. No, nothing further.
Okay, the time is now 10:34 a.m. We've been going at it here for an hour and a half. I think what we'll do is why don't we take a 16-minute break? We'll reconvene at 10:50. We'll pick up with cross-examination at that time. Again, time is 10:34 a.m. We will go off the record. Yeah, you can't promise anything but right. Mike's gonna come live.
Oh my gosh, yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Testing, 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 testing. Testing, 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 testing.
All right. Let's get rolling again. All right, the time is now 10:50 a.m. We go back on the record. Mr. Uda, I understand you have a scheduling or procedural matter you'd like to raise with the commission.
Is that better? So this really just involves me. I don't really have any questions, I think, for the witnesses that are going to be presenting this afternoon. And so I was hoping I could request the commission's indulgence to attend by Zoom. I also have, this is probably unnecessary detail, but I also have a contractor coming to my house to look at some water damage. So I was hoping I would have some flexibility there.
Well, Mr. Uda, as someone who had their house flood both in December of 20 and January of 2022, I'm somewhat sympathetic to that. So I just want to clarify, however, that your participation by Zoom, are you waiving the right to do cross-examination questions?
It's a very elegant thing.
Technology is not your friend, Mr. Uda.
No, it's not. What I was saying is, yeah, I can waive cross for this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Then you are excused.
I'll let you know if situation changes tomorrow.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Uda. You're excused. Okay, where we had left off was the commission had been done with its questioning. Is your mic off? Your mic off, Mike? Okay.
It's not off, is it?
Okay. All right, we had left off. Commission was done with its questioning, so we go back to recross. Ms. Trinnell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Higgins, I wanted to follow up on a question you were asked about single issue rate making. And I believe you testified, I think I heard you say that the PCAM mechanism, as you understand it, is an approved single issue rate making. Was that your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Higgins, are you familiar with the commission's docket number 2021-04047 that had to do with the PCAM specifically in single issue rate making?
I no, not necessarily.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to look at this order 7788F, and specifically, I'd like you to look at a couple of paragraphs in this.
You may approach.
Mr. President, does council have copies of whatever she's providing the witness, for myself at least, if not the other parties in the commission? Does she have that in time for me to look at it before she asks my witnesses questions? I guess. Well, I think if council is going to ask the witness questions about a document, she should share that with council.
I'm going to.
And this order is.
I can email it to you
What's
real
that
quick.
docket?
It's a PCAM docket. Yep.
Or?
Yeah, so the council indicated she can email it now. Oh.
All right, time's now 10:54 a.m. We'll go off the record. Hold on, Mr. Trinnell. Mr. Nelson, let me know when and if you receive the email. Oh, no, hold on. Time is now 10:55 a.m. We'll go back on the record. All right, Mr. Nelson. All right, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. So just to reset a little bit, Mr. Higgins, I was just asking you to look at the commission's actual orders addressing the question of whether or not PCAM is an approved single issue rate making. And so I've directed your attention to the final order in the last docket on this 2021-04-047. So Mr. Higgins, if you look at paragraph 48 in that final order, 7788F, what does that first portion of paragraph 48 say?
Says moving to the merits, order 7563C approved updating base rates only during a subsequent full rate case. Quote, Northwestern and MCC make persuasive arguments for updating baseline supply costs in the context of full rate cases rather than annually in the context of applications under the tracking mechanism. The commission approves this approach, end quote.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. And then moving down to paragraph 54, there's a highlighted sentence in there addressing this question of single issue rate making. Could you read that sentence?
The sentence in paragraph 54 that you've highlighted says that docket, while authorizing Northwestern's electricity costs tracker, limited reviews of PCAM base costs to general rate cases.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. And then the ordering paragraph at the end of the order at paragraph 59. Could you read that ordering paragraph that's highlighted there in paragraph 59?
The first sentence in paragraph 59 states, consistent with order 7563C, Northwestern may request an increase to PCAM revenues under the procedures the commission has established for general rate cases. See generally Montana Code annotated section 69-3-302.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. That's all about that. And I just have a couple follow-up, but let me grab my computer real quick. So, Mr. Higgins, based on what we just looked at in terms of the commission's decisions and authority, is it your understanding that the commission has actually not approved PCAM as a single issue rate making?
I did not read that into the language that you had me look at.
Fair enough. And that was poorly worded. Let me try to rephrase that. Is it your understanding based on the commission's order that updating the base requirements of the PCAM should happen in a general rate case?
Yes, updating the base PCAM revenues, which is a distinct question from whether the PCAM mechanism is itself a single issue rate making mechanism.
Okay. Okay, and that's fair. And the point is that you really want to have matching revenues and costs whenever you're looking at a utilities overall, what the costs are passing on to ratepayers. Fair?
That is generally true. There are exceptions that are permitted in rate making, typically when it comes to fuel costs. And when it comes to fuel costs, many commissions, if not all commissions, have adopted single issue rate making mechanisms that allow for the recovery of changes in fuel costs in between general rate cases.
And generally known as trackers, right?
It can be called trackers. They go by various names, but that is a mechanism that's permitted.
Okay. And on paragraph 15, just a question for the large customer group. of the 14.7 million that would go into the PCAM, if the plant goes into service, what portion of that do you know would, your client, the large customer group, be responsible for?
I don't know the portion, but I do know that there are members of the large customer group that do purchase their energy supply from Northwestern and therefore would be subject to the PCAM
Okay.
cost.
Okay. And then following up on some questions you were asked by Commissioner Pinucci regarding what, portion of who's buying what from Northwestern and affected by what. And then going back to, I think, the Sleepy Hollow discussion, is it your understanding that none of the large customer group purchase gas from Northwestern, and so they're not affected by the Sleepy Hollow acquisition? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So Sleepy Hollow is a bad deal. No skin off of your people, right?
Also
Good.
staying there. Can you rephrase, please?
So if Sleepy Hollow is going to end up costing a lot of money to the ratepayers of Northwestern, that should not impact your group. Is that your understanding?
My understanding is that that is a particular item that does not affect large customer group members.
Okay, fair enough. And then should I ask transmission questions to Mr. Bieber?
I guess it depends on the question, I suppose.
Okay.
If it involves rate design or cost allocation, yes.
Are you aware that Northwestern opposed the building of the DC line from Colstrip to Minneapolis?
I'm not aware.
Okay. And are you familiar with the fact that Northwestern sought a bill for the right of first refusal to build transmission in Montana?
Objection, relevance?
Ms. Trinnell, can you
Well,
provide the commission some indication of where you're going with this line of
well,
questioning?
a significant portion of this rate increase that's being requested is attributable to T&D, transmission and distribution. And so I think to the extent that transmission is an issue in Montana and those costs should be addressed, planned for, prepared for, understood, I think that's relevant to how the commission looks at this docket and the significant increases that are being asked for here. And it was just whether he's aware of it or not. And then I was done.
I will give you limited rope on this. How's that? Go ahead, Mr. No.
That was my only question, Mr. Higgins, is are you familiar with the fact that Northwestern sought a bill to have the right of first refusal to build all transmission in Montana?
No.
Thank you. What is the large customers group with respect to participating at the FERC in terms of cost allocation on transmission? Does this, I guess I'm not asking this question very well. Does this settlement prohibit the large customer group from participating in FERC proceedings with respect to cost allocation for transmission?
Not to my knowledge, no.
That's all, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. No. Mr. McGraw.
No questions, Mr. President.
Very good. Mr. Uda, no questions. Ms. Hornbein.
Renewable Northwest has no questions at this time.
Very good. Mr. Helly.
Thank you, Mr. President. No questions.
Thank you. Okay, redirect.
I approach the witness.
Of course.
Placed in front of the witness a copy of the order that was witness discussed with Ms. Trinnell. We'll be referring to that in the course of the redirect. All right. Mr. Higgins, in the course of cross-examination from Ms. Trinnell and President Brown, do you recall a series of questions that you were posed regarding paragraph 15 of the stipulation
Yes,
generally?
generally.
Okay. And maybe we'll just start at the end here. I've placed in front of you the commission's order in the PCAM update case. Do you see that, sir?
Yes,
Do you recall that Ms. Trinnell asked you to read from that order, including the first sentence of paragraph 59? Do you recall that?
yes.
Okay. Could you please read for the record the last sentence of paragraph 59, beginning with the words, nor does dismissal?
Nor does dismissal prohibit Northwestern from requesting updates for PCAM-based costs regarding future extraordinary events or unforeseen regulations as originally contemplated by Northwestern and affirmed by the Commission during the 2017 PCAM docket.
Can you please now look at paragraph 15 of the stipulation and let me know when you have that in front of you?
I have it in front of me.
Can you please, just so it's clear, read the second sentence of the paragraph 15?
The stipulating parties agree that Northwestern may request a one-time PCAM base costs and property tax base reset to be effective on the date Yellowstone County Generating Station is placed into service.
So that sentence indicates that Northwestern may request a base increase. Would you agree with me that that sentence does not indicate that Northwestern shall receive a base increase?
Correct. It does not indicate that Northwestern shall receive a base increase.
And to whom is Northwestern making that request?
To the Commission.
And is it your understanding that the Commission, at the time the request is made, will evaluate that, including perhaps considering all of the factors that the Commission considered in the decision that you've been reading from today?
Yes.
Right. One of the other issues I want to cover with you about paragraph 15 is, do you recall a series of questions from Ms. Trinnell talking about the dollars in the bullet points, in the variable O&M costs that the paragraph 15 discusses may be sought to be included in the PCAM? Do you recall that discussion from Ms. Trinnell?
Discussion from Ms. Trinnell, yes, I do.
Okay. Now, one thing I want to make sure I'm clear on, I think you indicated this, but is it your understanding that the dollar amounts in those bullet points are what will actually be sought for recovery, or are those only estimates?
Those are only estimates.
So what is actually sought might be different. Is that fair?
Yes.
Is it also the case that in the context of resetting the base, is it your understanding that when Northwestern does this, that it will remove from base power costs market purchases that are replaced by Yellowstone?
Yes, that would be part of resetting base.
So if that occurs, hypothetically, if the market purchases cost Northwestern exactly what the variable O&M and fuel costs are associated with Yellowstone, what would be the net effect of that on customer rates?
Well, if you include in your question the gas transmission reservation charges of $8.4 million, if that was also part of what was avoided from the market purchase, then the net effect would be zero.
Okay, so as you sit here today, is it possible to know with certainty whether this request, if one is made, would in fact increase customer rates or not?
No, not, one can't tell today whether it would result in an increase, no change, or a decrease.
Another issue that you discussed with Ms. Trinnell was the timing of a determination by the commission of the prudence of the Yellowstone County Generating Station and recovery of costs associated with Yellowstone from customers. Do you recall that discussion?
Yes.
And I believe your answer was that the prudence would be determined in advance of customers paying the costs of Yellowstone. Do you recall that, sir?
Yes.
In making that answer, did you intend to preclude the possibility that customers, that Northwestern could ask a future commission to establish interim rates subject to refund to reflect the costs of O&M and other variable costs associated with Yellowstone while the prudency proceeding is pending?
In providing that answer, I was not intending to preclude the possibility of Northwestern asking for interim rate recovery subject to refund.
And that would be subject to the ordinary interim procedures that this commission operates under. Would that be fair?
Yes.
You recall a series of questions. Well, actually, before I do that, let me ask my final question relative to paragraph 15, and then we'll come back to that. President Brown asked you some questions about what would happen if the settlement were not approved, or if this PCAM reset wasn't approved relative to Northwestern's ability to recover the costs that are discussed in paragraph 15. Do you recall that, sir?
Yes.
Okay. I want to follow up on that question by asking you this hypothetical. If paragraph 15 is not approved, do you have that in mind?
Yes.
And Northwestern does not recover the costs of the variable non-fuel O&M and all these, the three bullet point items, those costs are not recovered until after a rate case is filed following the construction and bringing the plant into service. Do you have that in mind, sir?
Yes.
Okay. My question is this: if Yellowstone comes into service before that rate case and that plant offsets market purchases, how does those avoided costs, or how do those avoided costs get reflected in the PCAM?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say that, frankly, Northwestern would probably be able to give you a more precise answer to that, because generally speaking, if a facility comes into service, but it has not been determined to be prudent yet, or it has not been reviewed in a rate case, there is something in my mind of an open question as to how it gets treated in a fuel adjuster, and each state may treat that differently. And so I wouldn't want to speculate as to exactly how that circumstance would be interpreted with Northwestern's PCAM.
Okay, fair enough. Commissioner Panucci asked you a series of questions from the perspective of one of his rate-paying constituents regarding whether or not the customer classes of Northwestern would be or are proposed to pay a fair share of the costs of Northwestern. Do you recall those questions, sir?
Yes.
My question to you is this, and again, understanding that Mr. Bieber will speak to the details, from your perspective and your experience, what is the relationship between what a reasonable fair share is and the information that is developed in the context of a class cost of service study?
when a class cost of service study is conducted, one looks at two basic things. One looks at the assignment or allocation of costs to the class based on the facilities that they use and when they use them. And one also looks at the revenues that are currently being recovered from the class. And to the extent that the revenues that are currently being recovered from the class are insufficient to cover the cost, that's called a revenue deficiency, and the class would require an increase for the cost of service study. And if the revenues are greater than the costs that are required to serve the class, then that's a revenue sufficiency. And all things being equal, the class would actually warrant a rate reduction if its service were priced at cost.
From your experience and based on your understanding, is one way to determine what a fair share each class should pay looking to the results of the class cost of service study?
Yes.
And why is that?
The class cost of service study identifies what each class's cost responsibility is based on the facilities it uses and when it uses those facilities.
So why isn't it that you would just decide a fair share by always giving all customers an equal percentage increase?
If that were the approach, then classes would move potentially further and further away from their paying rates that reflect the costs that they actually impose on the system.
And would that be more fair or less fair in your opinion?
It would be less fair.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. I have no further questions of this witness.
Very good. Do you want to temporarily or permanently?
I would ask that Mr. Higgins be permanently excused.
Is there any objection to that? Seeing none, Mr. Higgins, thank you so much for your time. You are permanently excused. Safe travels.
Thank you.
And at this time, the LCG would call Mr. Justin Bieber to the stand.
Right? Mr. Bieber, please approach. Mr. Bieber, I believe you were sworn in this morning, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Thor, your witness.
Give me just one moment. Good morning, Mr. Bieber.
Good morning.
Would you please state and spell your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Justin Bieber, JUSTIN BIEBER.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm a principal with Energy Strategies consulting firm.
And on whose behalf are you testifying today?
On behalf of the Montana Large Customer Group.
Mr. Bieber, did you cause to be pre-filed in this proceeding both direct and cross-intervenor testimony and exhibits?
Yes, I did.
Mr. President, at this time, I would move for the admission of Exhibit LCG 1, which is Mr. Bieber's direct testimony and exhibits that were pre-filed in this case.
All right, is there objection? Seeing none, LCG 1 is admitted.
And at this time, I would move the admission of Exhibit LCG 3, which is Mr. Bieber's cross-intervenor testimony and exhibits.
Is there objection to LCG 3? Seeing none, LCG 3 is admitted.
Mr. Bieber, were you involved in the negotiation of the stipulation that has been entered into evidence in this case as Exhibit Joint 1?
Yes,
And from your perspective, do you believe that the stipulation taken as a whole is in the public interest?
yes, taken as a whole, I believe it is in the public interest.
Do you believe that the stipulation will result in rates that are reasonable in light of the company's revenue requirements?
Yes, I do.
Do you believe that the stipulation will result in rates that are sufficient to give the company a reasonable opportunity to earn the rate of return specified in the stipulation?
Yes,
Mr. Bieber, I'd like to discuss with you the specifics of the stipulation's approach to revenue allocation and rate design, which are the areas of your testimony, correct?
yes, that's correct.
Okay. Could I please ask you to take a look at what's been marked for identification as Exhibit LCG 5? Do you have that in front of you, sir?
Yes, I do.
First of all, Mr. Bieber, did you prepare this exhibit?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And just at a high level, will you please explain what is presented in Exhibit 5 on the first page?
Yes, on the first page, the exhibit starts with the electric embedded cost of service results presented by Northwestern in this case, at Northwestern's proposed revenue requirement, as well as the cost of service results presented by the large customer group, also at Northwestern's revenue requirement. I then adjusted the cost of service results to reflect the stipulated revenue requirement. And that was done for each of the cost of service studies by starting with the cost of service results and determining the percentage of total cost for each class compared to the total system cost, and then adjusting the cost of service in a manner that both matched the stipulated revenue requirement and maintained the same percentage of revenue for each class relative to the total system cost.
And did you rely on this analysis in the context of your advising the large customer group in the stipulation?
Yes, I did.
And then can you please generally describe what is depicted on the second page of Exhibit LCG 5? Excuse me, what's been marked for identification as Exhibit LCG 5?
Yes, and I'd just like to add one more thing on the first page.
Oh, please.
In addition to the adjusted cost of service results, it also shows the stipulated revenue requirement increase by class. And on the second page of the exhibit, it shows the stipulated revenue allocation of natural gas revenues. And it compares that to the revenue allocation that was provided in the MCC's testimony. And that revenue allocation provided by the MCC at the MCC's proposed revenue requirement, I'm sorry, the rate increase proposed by the MCC is used to determine the settlement revenue allocation through a similar process as I used on the electric side. And that is the total revenue for each class under the MCC's proposed rate increase was used. The settlement revenue allocation was set equal relative to the total system revenue, was set equal to the total revenue under the MCC's proposal relative to the total system revenue.
And Mr. Bieber, did you rely on this analysis in your advising the large customer group relative to the stipulation as well?
Yes, I did.
Mr. President, I move the admission of Exhibit LCG 5.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, may I have word here? Please. I have one clarification. I think I object to it as written, but I think if we can clarify it, I'll be okay with the exhibit.
All right, please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Bieber, on the Exhibit 5, can you clarify, is current rates, is that the interim rates?
No, these are the current revenues prior to the filing of the rate case.
So
Correct.
this,
Sorry, current base revenues inclusive of property taxes.
oh, okay, so current rates, as identified in this column would be August of 2022 rates.
I'm not sure about the last effective date, but they were the revenues recovered through the base rates prior to the rate change in this rate, prior to the proposed rate change in this rate case.
Mr. President, Mr. Nelson, I don't object to the exhibit, but I do want to be clear that the percent change, what is the base that we're using as the metric?
So
Is it?
Ms. Tranel, so that would be a proper question for cross-examination. So
Okay.
right now we're determining whether to admit this.
Oh, okay.
document.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you.
All right, so you're withdrawing your objection, I understand. Okay, and is there any other objection to this document? Okay, seeing none, LCG 5 is moved into evidence. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Bieber, I'd like to start by talking with you about how the stipulation approaches the electric revenue allocation issue. And first, just to lay some foundation here, can you just describe for the commission what is a class cost of service study?
Yes, a class cost of service study is an analysis that assigns the actual costs of providing service to the customer classes, and it compares it to the revenues that are being recovered. And so the intent is to determine what is the actual cost to serve each group of customers.
And is it important, in your opinion, for commissions to consider class cost of service studies when setting utility rates?
Yes, it is important. It's a guide that helps inform efficient rates that provide proper price signals and also ensure equity among customers.
For purposes of the electric side of this case, in this proceeding, which parties prepared and submitted a class cost of service study for the commission's consideration?
Northwestern and the large customer group submitted electric embedded cost of service study results in this proceeding. The federal executive agency's witness also proposed a correction to Northwestern's electric cost of service study.
Did any of the non-settling parties provide a class cost of service study in this docket for the commission's consideration?
No, they did not.
Now, at the time that Northwestern and the large customer group provided their class cost of service studies, is it fair to say that those studies were done in the first instance by Northwestern, starting with the revenue requirement that they requested in its direct case? Is that correct?
Yes.
And then for the LCG and the work that you did, you analyzed the cost of service both at Northwestern's proposed revenue requirement and at the revenue requirement recommended by the LCG. Is that fair?
Yes.
Now, the stipulation revenue requirement is different than the revenue requirement that was requested by Northwestern or recommended by the LCG, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So as we've discussed a moment ago, in Exhibit 5, you performed a calculation to estimate the results of applying the Northwestern and LCG class cost of service results to the revenue level proposed in the stipulation, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So I want to talk about now the impacts of that analysis and how that was used to inform your opinions about the stipulation. And I'll start, please, on the first page of this exhibit relating to electric. Do you have that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And I want to focus on each of the classes in turn and talk about how those were handled and the implications, okay?
Okay.
All right. So starting with the residential class. Looking at the class cost of service results at the stipulation revenue requirement, how does the stipulated revenue allocation compare to the cost of service results for the residential class?
The stipulated revenue allocation to the residential class is lower than the residential cost of service in all of the cost of service studies that were provided in this case. Specifically, the stipulated rate increase is about 3.3% less than would be required to align with Northwestern's revenue adjusted cost of service study, and about 7.8% less than would be required to align with cost, according to the large customer group's revenue adjusted cost of service study.
Great. And can you direct the commission where on the first page of Exhibit 5 can they find the numbers that then yield that calculation that you just testified to?
Yes, if you look at the second set of charts on the first page of Exhibit LCG 5, you can see that the residential class would require a 21.5% increase under Northwestern's adjusted cost of service study. But according to the stipulation, they would receive an 18.2% rate increase, which is 3.3% less than the 21.5. And similarly, according to the large customer group adjusted cost of service results, the residential class would require a 26% increase to align with their cost of service, which is 7.8% higher than the increase in the stipulation.
What conclusions can you draw from that information regarding whether and the extent to which residential customers on the electric side are currently subsidized and will continue to be subsidized even if the stipulation is approved?
Since all of the cost of service results indicate that the residential class would require a larger than average rate increase, I can conclude that they're currently being subsidized. And based on the stipulated rate increase for the residential class, it would continue to receive a subsidy in the range of about 3.3% to 7.8% of its current revenue, or approximately $8 million to $19 million.
And is that annual?
Yes, that's annually.
And I want to turn your attention to some other classes. And in particular, I want to talk about the irrigation and lighting classes. Okay?
Okay.
Based on the class cost of service results at the stipulation revenue requirement, how does the stipulated revenue allocation compare to the cost of service results for the irrigation and lighting classes?
For the irrigation and lighting classes, the stipulated revenue requirement is equal to their cost of service under Northwestern's proposed adjusted cost of service study.
And once again, can you point the commission to where they can see that displayed on the page 1 of the exhibit?
Yes. So towards the bottom of page 1, you look at the irrigation adjusted cost of service, they would require a 6.3% rate increase. And if you go all the way to the right, you can see that the settlement stipulation would provide them a 6.3% rate increase. And similarly, for the lighting class, you can see that the adjusted cost of service rate increase would be 16.4%. And if you go all the way to the right, you can see that's what they would receive under the stipulation.
So what conclusions can you draw regarding whether and the extent to which the irrigation and lighting customers under the stipulation would pay rates generally consistent with their cost of service?
If the stipulation is approved, I conclude that these classes will pay rates that are consistent with their cost of service, according to Northwestern's adjusted cost of service study.
And those outcomes are then, of course, within the range of the results presented by the Northwestern study and the large customer group study, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Let's turn to the GS2 substation class. Based on the class cost of service results at the stipulation revenue requirement, how does the stipulated revenue allocation compare to the cost of service results for the GS2 substation class?
The stipulated revenue target for the GS2 substation class the class would pay rates that are less than Northwestern's revenue adjusted cost of service, but greater than the large customer group's revenue adjusted cost of service. Specifically, the stipulated rate increase is about 4.9% less than what would be required to align with cost, according to Northwestern's revenue adjusted cost of service, but about 10.9% more than would be required to align with cost, according to the large customer group's revenue adjusted cost of service.
And what conclusions can you draw from that regarding whether and the extent to which those customers would pay rates consistent with their cost of service if the stipulation were approved?
I conclude that they would pay rates that are generally consistent with the cost of service within the range of the cost of service results provided in this proceeding. Based on the large customer group's recommended revenue adjusted cost of service, I believe they will pay a subsidy equal to about 10.9% of current revenue, or $1.6 million per year. However, based on Northwestern's revenue adjusted cost of service, they would receive a subsidy equal to about 4.9%, or $700,000 per year.
Can you explain why the 18.2 was selected from your perspective, and in particular, if it's coincidental that that's the same figure that the settlement proposes for the residential class?
Yes, it is not a coincidence that the rate increase for GS2 substation is the same as the rate increase for the residential class in the stipulation. The parties didn't believe it was fair for a class that arguably could receive a lower rate increase than the residential class to receive a rate increase that was actually higher. And so we settled on the rate increase being the same within the stipulation.
Let's talk about the GS1 primary and the GS2 transmission classes. Take those together. Based on the class cost of service results of the stipulation revenue requirement, how does that compare to the class cost of service results for the GS1 primary and the GS2 transmission classes?
All of the cost of service studies provided in this proceeding indicate that the GS1 primary and GS2 transmission rate classes would deserve a cost-based rate decrease at the stipulated revenue requirement. So the 0% rate increase for GS1 primary is actually about 3.2% higher than the rate decrease that would be required for them to align with the cost of service, according to Northwestern's revenue adjusted cost of service study, and 12.3% higher than the rate decrease that would be required to align with cost, according to the large customer group's revenue adjusted cost of service study. And the stipulated 0% rate increase for GS2 transmission is about 14% greater than the rate decrease that would be required to align with cost, according to Northwestern's revenue adjusted cost of service, and about 31.1% greater than the rate decrease that would be required to align with cost, according to the large customer group's revenue adjusted cost of service study.
For these classes and all of the others, do these class cost of service results at the stipulated revenue requirement include the impact of property tax changes?
Yes, they do. So the cost of service results include the total base revenue requirement inclusive of property taxes. So if the cost of service results are indicating that a class's cost of service is below the current revenues for that class, then that means that even with the increase in property taxes, the class is still paying above cost at their current rates.
Last but not least, let's talk about the GS1 secondary class. Based on the class cost of service results at the stipulation revenue requirement, how does that compare to the cost of service results for the GS1 secondary group?
The stipulated revenue allocation for GS1 secondary class is greater than their class cost of service, according to all of the cost of service studies provided in this proceeding. Specifically, the stipulated rate increase is about 3% greater than the rate increase that'd be required to align with cost, according to Northwestern's revenue adjusted cost of service study, and 4.7% greater than the rate increase that would be required to align with cost under the large customer groups revenue adjusted cost of service study.
For that class and the other customer classes who are under the stipulation getting a higher level of rates than would be suggested by the class cost of service studies, is it fair to say that that additional revenue is what is being used to permit the continuing subsidy provided in the stipulation for the residential class?
Yes, that would be fair.
Mr. Bieber, what rate classes do the LCG members take service under?
The LCG members take service under GS1 primary, GS2 substation, and GS2 transmission, both choice and non-choice.
Is it true that the LCG members will all get no rate change if the settlement is approved?
No, that is not correct. The LCG members are in a variety of rate classes, some of which are proposed to get net rate increases in the stipulation.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about natural gas for a moment. Could I ask you to turn to page 2 of Exhibit 5?
Okay.
Can you please explain how the stipulation arrived at its proposed revenue allocation under the natural gas stipulated revenue requirement?
Yes. So the stipulated revenue allocation of natural gas revenues started with the MCC's proposed rate increase at the MCC's proposed revenue requirement. And I determined the total revenues for each class under that proposal and adjusted those revenues so that the total revenues under the stipulated revenue requirement would be equal to the same proportion of the revenues under the MCC's proposal relative to the total system revenue.
So for example, using the residential class as an illustrative, could you show using the tables on page 2 of this exhibit how that plays out in the numbers?
Yes. So if you look at the first line of the table on page 2, the MCC recommended that the residential class get a 3.95% rate increase at the MCC's proposed revenue requirement, which based on the revenue at current rates would be a almost $3.3 million rate increase, or a result in $86.5 million of total revenue, which is 55.3% of the total revenue at the MCC's proposed rate increases. So that total revenue was adjusted to the settlement revenue requirement so that the residential total revenue was also equal to 55.3% of the total revenue.
And then that same methodology was employed for the other natural gas classes, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And is that why the percent of total column on the settlement revenue allocation is identical to the percent of total column under the MCC revenue allocation, just applying that to different levels of revenue change?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, let's talk about rate design for a moment. Relative to the rate design in the stipulation for the residential, irrigating, and lighting classes, is it fair to say that those determinations were primarily made by discussions between Northwestern and the MCC, and that the LCG, for example, did not take a view on rate design for those classes?
Yes, that is correct.
Relative to the GS1 secondary rate design, is it fair to say that similarly, the LCG did not take a view on the particulars of that, but deferred to the other stipulating parties, most importantly Walmart, who's a member of that class, in terms of the rate design for that group?
Yes, that's correct.
For the GS1 primary and the GS2 classes, is it fair to say that the LCG did take a perspective on how the rate design would be accomplished relative to achieving the stipulated revenue allocation and revenue requirement?
Yes, that is correct. In reviewing the rate design closely, I had two objectives. One was to ensure that it recovered the target revenue requirement in the stipulation, and also that there were equitable impacts within the rate class.
And when you say equitable impacts, as between who?
Primarily between choice and non-choice customers.
And how did you achieve the objectives that you set forth? That is ensuring that the total revenues are collected and that there is equity between choice and non-choice groups within those three classes?
But we started with Northwestern's rate design objectives for the GS2 substation class and made some small adjustments to the rates to make sure that they recovered both the target revenue requirement for the class and also that the revenues from the different rate elements resulted in equitable rate impacts between choice and non-choice customers. For the GS1 primary and GS2 transmission rate classes, since they're already recovering more than their cost and there's no rate increase in this case, there was no change to the rates for those classes.
In your opinion, are the rate designs proposed in the stipulation, particularly with reference to the classes that you focused on as you've testified, will those result in rates that are reasonable?
Yes.
Let's shift to the natural gas side of the house. Which customer classes are the LCG members a part of relative to the natural gas operations?
The LCG members are a member of the DBU transportation and TBU transportation classes.
And did you take a look at the proposed rates for those two classes as a result of your analysis under the stipulation?
Yes, I did.
And what is your opinion in terms of whether the proposed rates for the DBU and TBU transportation classes are reasonable?
My interpretation is that they are reasonable and that the rates are designed in a way to recover the target revenue requirement from the stipulation.
Thank you, Mr. Bieber. Mr. President, I have no further questions of this witness in direct, and he is available for cross-examination and questions from the commission.
All right, thank you, Thor. So I think this will be a good time to break for the lunch period. We did have a request yesterday to make the lunch period an hour and 15 minutes. There was no objection to that, so why don't we reconvene? We'll give everybody a little bit longer for lunch today. Why don't we reconvene at 1:10 p.m.? We will pick up with cross-examination. Before we do that, I would like to address some scheduling requests that were made. Mr. Oram, we had discussed yesterday that you have witnesses that you would like to put on today, correct?
That's correct, President. Thanks.
Okay, are they time limited in any way by like a flight or anything to that effect?
No.
Okay. Ms. Trinnell, I believe you had a request, correct? Okay, so, Mr. Orm, how long do you expect to? Fair question. All right, I'll just take note of those two requests and we will do our best to accommodate both those requests this afternoon. Okay, time is now 11:50 a.m. We will go off the record.